Blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I tell you, many kings and prophets have desired to see what you see, and have not seen it. To hear what you hear, and have not heard it. I thank you, Father, for hiding these things from the learned and the wise, and revealing them to the innocent and the simple.
Russia has launched a new set of strikes against ISIS in Syria. Russian ships in the Caspian Sea fired cruise missiles at the terror group's positions, targeting their oil reserves. So far this week, Russia says it has destroyed 15 oil facilities in Syria and 525 trucks carrying oil. 600 militants were also reported killed. Officials estimate the damage to the oil reserves have cost the terror group more than $1 million. That's a big hit because ISIS relies on selling oil as a major source of income to fund their terror operations.
The terrorist Islam, known as Daesh, had kidnapped at least 20 Shia Muslims in Afghanistan. The militants reportedly kidnapped the Shias traveling on a bus on the Kabul-Kandahar highway. Afghan officials have launched a massive operation to locate and release the hostages. Shia Muslims have been the main victims of Daesh atrocities over the past months. Earlier this year, the militants took hostage 31 Shias in the southern province of Ghazni. The violence has sparked massive demos in Kabul and other cities. The protesters urged the government to take decisive actions against the militants.
5 Syrian nationals allegedly paid $10,000 each to be smuggled through a route in Latin America before being detained for carrying false Greek documents in Honduras. The Syrians informed human rights groups that their final destination was Guatemala, where they were promised jobs and a home by their Turkish smuggler.
We are worried about the lack of due process. This is a lack of due process from the moment immigration transported them to police. There was no pre-interview for them to explain they were fleeing violence.
A U.S. rights activist said all 5 are part of a wider group of 7 Syrian nationals that acquired forged passports in Brazil. The Syrians say they have been traveling for more than a year through a smuggling route that includes Argentina, Brazil, and Honduras.
Are these detained Syrians seeking a new start in another country, or are they terrorists? U.S. officials believe they were trying to reach the United States, but recognize there is no evidence that links them to Islamic militants.
It's already a winter wonderland in California's mountains, and they're expecting a lot more snow. Scientists say a massive El Nino in the Pacific is still getting stronger. These warm ocean waters near the equator force the jet stream that usually dumps rain on Central America north, bringing a conveyor belt of storms to California and the southern U.S.
This current El Nino has now surpassed the 1997-98 El Nino, which was the biggest on record, so it's huge.
Josh Willis is a climate scientist with NASA. He says El Niños typically impact Southern California. But this one is so big, it will hit the entire state.
Why is it important that a lot of these storms hit Northern California?
Our water supply is tied to Northern California, and it's been in a drought for more than a decade.
California's largest reservoirs are in Northern California, and they are at historic lows. But El Nino comes at a cost. Those storms in the winter of 97-98 caused $500 million in damage and killed 17 people in California.
Now the hacker group Anonymous warns that ISIL terrorists are planning a series of attacks around the world. Anonymous says it's reached a conclusion after hacking into the secret data network of Daesh. It's also published a list of events in France, the United States, Indonesia, Italy, and Lebanon, which are at risk of being targeted by ISIL. Now, cyber attackers have declared war on the Takfiri group in the wake of the deadly Paris attacks last week.
Figures released by a British group show that Islamophobic hate crimes rose by 300% in the weeks after the Paris attacks. Tell Mama, A helpline which records attacks against British Muslims and mosques has posted 115 racial attacks since November the 13th. According to the group, the majority of victims have been hijab-wearing Muslim women and girls aged 14 to 45. The perpetrators were mostly young white men. A large number of assaults include verbal and physical abuse and occurred in public places, on buses and trains, and at least 8 cases of victims had young children. Many of them said that no one rushed to their assistance or consoled them in the wake of the assault. Tell Mama says that could be just the tip of the iceberg, as many victims are too frightened to contact police or community groups.
Police are on alert this morning here in the United States. They have been warned about the newest threat from ISIS. Sources tell CBS News the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security sent out a joint intelligence bulletin. It tells law enforcement agencies about the terror group's newest tactics.
And a CBS News poll out this morning finds Americans are more fearful of a terror attack. 69% think an attack in the U.S. is very or somewhat likely to happen in the next few months.
As Americans make plans to travel for the holidays, the U.S. and European governments fear terrorists are making plans for more attacks. The State Department has issued an uncommon worldwide alert due to increased terrorist threats, and the head of Homeland Security says there could be more attacks like those in Paris.
We are, and we continue to be, and we have been concerned about copycat-like attacks.
The travel alert, in effect until February 24th, says current information suggests that militants with Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and other terrorist groups continue to plan attacks in multiple regions. U.S. authorities said the likelihood of terror attacks will continue as members of ISIS return from Syria and Iraq, and other individuals not affiliated with terror groups engage in violence on their own. As seen in Paris, terrorists have targeted places where crowds gather, such as sporting events, theaters, and restaurants. U.S. citizens should exercise vigilance when in public places or using transportation, the alert said. Be aware of immediate surroundings and avoid large crowds or crowded places. Exercise particular caution during the holiday season and at holiday festivals or events. As threats loom both in the U.S. and abroad, President Obama meets with French President Francois Hollande at the White House today. The pair will discuss how to ramp up the fight against ISIS extremists. This meeting comes as a new poll shows that the public does not think that President Obama has a clear strategy for dealing with ISIS. And many critics say the French president has been stronger in dealing with terrorism than President Obama. The meeting also comes as the president is dealing with another serious problem: the question of whether analysts at Central Command, which oversees Pentagon operations in the Middle East, changed assessments of the campaign against ISIS to make it appear as though the U.S. and Western partners were making more progress than they actually were. It's just another problem for the president when it comes to the public's view of how he's handling terrorism. A new CBS poll found that 66% do not think he has a clear plan for dealing with ISIS. Now, after terrorism in Paris, terrorism has become the top issue for Americans amid threats of more attacks both abroad and here in America. And the public doesn't believe that President Obama has the answers.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is threatening serious consequences after Turkey shot down a Russian warplane. NATO member Turkey says it fired on the fighter jet after a violation of its airspace. Video shows the plane on fire before it crashed into a mountain in Syria.
Russia says the plane never crossed into Turkey. A U.S. drone is helping search for the wreckage.
Good morning. The Turkish military said they gave 10 warnings over the course of 5 minutes that the Russian warplane was flying over its airspace. They said they got no reply, and that's when Turkish F-16 fighter jets opened fire.
Video shot from below shows the Russian warplane plummeting toward the ground in flames before impact. At least one parachute was seen descending after the strike. Unverified video posted by Syrian rebels from the area appears to show a motionless Russian crewman. The rebels say he's dead, though it's unclear, if true, whether he died in the initial strike or whether he was killed in crossfire on the ground. Russian helicopters were then seen flying over the area of the crash in an apparent search and rescue operation for its lost crew. President Putin was quick to condemn an attack he described as a stab in the back by accomplices of terrorism, while his defense minister insisted that the warplane never strayed from Syrian territory. The region is filled with Syrian rebels who are ethnic Turks, and Turkey has bitterly criticized the Russians for the bombardment of the area in its campaign in Syria.
Now, the downing of a fighter jet not only underlines the fact that U.S. aircraft are flying in very crowded skies over Syria, Russia and Turkey are on opposite sides. Russia backs the Assad regime, Turkey, the rebels that Russia has been bombing. Turkey is also a NATO ally. The Kremlin has called it a very serious incident, and NATO is calling for an emergency meeting this afternoon.
Turkey's President Erdogan said he didn't want to escalate the situation, but he needed to protect Turkey's security and defend their allies inside Syria. Russia's military defense condemned the attack and announced 3 steps it would take after the incident. It said bombing attacks would be escorted by fighter jets, air defenses would be increased, and military contacts with Turkey would be suspended. After the attack, Russia's President Vladimir Putin used exceptionally strong language. He called the incident a stab in the back, promised significant consequences to Turkey, and said Russia would not tolerate such atrocities. Russia's foreign minister canceled his upcoming trip to Turkey. Putin also accused Turkey of collusion with ISIS.
We stated many times the fact that a large amount of oil and oil products is being transferred to the territory of Turkey from the territory seized by ISIS. That is how these gangsters are receiving their financial support.
Turkey, a NATO member, asked NATO for an emergency meeting. It's the first time in 50 years a NATO plane shot down a Russian plane. It remains to be seen if NATO will invoke Article 5. It states an attack on one member is an attack on all. Turkey and Russia both produced evidence they said proved their version of events. Turkey said the Russian plane violated its airspace after 10 separate warnings. Russia said its plane was shot down over Syrian territory. After the plane was shot down, Syrian rebels produced this video showing them destroying one of the Russian helicopters sent to rescue the pilots. It appears the pilot died in the incident, while the co-pilot has been rescued. Russia and Turkey have a long history of tense relations, and the incident exposes 2 competing alliances seeking to dominate the region. Russia and Shiite Iran on one hand, and Sunni Turkey on the other. When Putin brought Russia into the Syrian civil war, retired U.S. General Jake Garner told CBN News he introduced a new danger to the region.
In the air, it should be a big problem if he puts fighter aircraft in there and they begin putting airstrikes against rebel forces while we're putting in airstrikes against Assad forces. How do you deconflict all that? And it's a tinderbox.
For now, it remains to be seen if the spark from this incident will set the tinderbox in the region on fire.
Back in friendly hands after waiting 12 hours for a special forces team to find and rescue him. The second pilot from the Russian plane shot down yesterday was today indignant at what had happened to him. There were no warnings, he said, not via the radio, not visually. There was no contact whatsoever. That's why we were keeping our combat course as usual. The first Russian response has been to deploy this, the S-400 missile system at its base in Syria, a potent warning to any who come near or interfere with its bombers in future. Back in Moscow, a large crowd protested outside the Turkish embassy this morning, first content to shout and hold posters, but before long throwing eggs, tomatoes, and then stones to break windows. Relations between Russia and Turkey may take a long time to repair after this. One expert here believes that escalation may be inevitable.
Now, most likely, the Kremlin believes they should level the score and maybe teach Turkey a lesson and shoot down a Turkish plane in response. That could lead to an escalation.
That's how high the stakes now are in the skies above Syria. Efforts at de-escalation are urgently needed.